Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This is a very special collaboration between the USC School of Cinematic Arts, Severin Films, and Fangoria's Colors of the Dark podcast. We're going to be doing a live screening of the 80s Italian zombie sleaze classic Burial Ground, aka The Nights of Terror. This is the first of two screenings that we're doing this month. Together with Severin and Colors of the Dark. We're going to have another one coming up on Monday, December 28th, with a screening of Bruno Mattei's sharksploitation saga, Cruel Jaws. So I will post the link for that in the chat once we get started. But let me please welcome up the hosts of Colors of the Dark, Dr. Rebekah McKendry and Elric Kane. Take it away, guys.
Hello, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Alex, you had it right with sleaze classic. This is some crazy bonkers stuff we're about to watch. And
I love that we live in an era where we can say the word sleaze classic. Like
know,
there was a time
right?
where you wouldn't get that. So this, I love that. We're in good times, and I'm drinking JMB. So
that's I have my USC Cinematic Arts coffee mugs. So, yeah.
I think I'm allowed to drink because I'm not from USC. I'm not sure about you.
I don't know. I feel like it's the vacation. We can totally do that.
Yeah, the semester's over. It's fair game.
Yeah.
Just so you know, mine only ended about an hour ago, my semester. So I am like bouncing from the end of school to this. So I couldn't be in better company for a better film.
You put on a suit jacket, so you're still fancy. So
with no pants, but here you go. Who needs it?
That's how you roll the pandemic. So welcome everyone to Colors of the Dark and our screening of Burial Ground. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Rebekah McKendry. I'm a professor at USC, and I also host Colors of the Dark podcast, co-host on the Fangoria podcast network with Elric Kane. Elric, introduce yourself. Aside from the pants thing, you should introduce yourself.
Yes. Well, we're both independent filmmakers. But I'm also, besides podcasts, I do the New Beverly Cinemas podcast, which is a broader film general podcast, different topics every other week. And I am also the chair of film and digital content at the, if this is a David and Goliath story, we are definitely David, you are Goliath. Just down the street from you, called Hutchin College, Los Angeles, was called Studio School last year, and 2 years before that, Relativity School. We are, just like the Italians, we love to change our names and have sequels that don't exist. That's us. But we are the little school that could. It's a little production school, and we punch above our weight, I like to think. Yeah. But yeah, and just like you, we're always on the hustle to try to get our stuff made.
Yeah. And Colors of the Dark podcast, Elric and I have been podcasting together for 9 years now, 8 or 9. It's been a long time. And we've had a couple of different shows in the mix. Colors of the Dark is we have with Fangoria Network, and Colors of the Dark, we cover both newer releases coming out, but because it's Elric and mine's passion, we're always kind of looking for those weird gems, for these weird historical moments in horror, for the stuff that might get overlooked, for the movie you're not expecting, for the holy shit, how does this even exist? How did this get made? And kind of what do we do with it now type cinema. And with that, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like a lot of people I either do podcasts with or talk movies with, I think a lot of them are more about comfort cinema and going back and rewatching things a lot of times. And the one thing where we've always kind of connected over is a sense of discovery, always wanting to see new films rather than rewatching, even though I love that. Obviously, we all do, which is actually exciting in some ways, too, when you do come back to a movie like this one, which I hadn't seen in 15 years, well before the nice release of it. So sometimes they can be like revelations and gems again. We are going to do everything we can not to talk much about the movie before the film starts itself. We're going to tee it up a little, and then get into the kind of spoiler territory after the film.
Yeah, this movie, as I mentioned, is completely bonkers. It's one of those that you just don't know how this movie ever existed. But a kind of patron saint of these movies, if you will, is joining us. And I'd like to welcome David Gregory. David runs Severin Films, and Severin Films are like the Criterion Collection for these kind of crazy movies, overlooked gems, just these kind of really historically significant films that just do not get enough love. David Gregory.
And Sinful Dwarf.
And Sinful Dwarf.
Which doesn't fit in any of those categories. Right.
Welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So Burial Ground, I had to do some research on this one because I was not as familiar with this director as I am with like Lucio Fulci or some of the other names that we hear over and over in repetition within this subgenre. Is Andrea Bianchi? Yeah, yes. Bianchi. Can you talk a little bit about the director?
Yeah, he's probably best known for doing some more sleazy genre pictures than his contemporaries, like Strip Nude for Your Killer and Malabimba, the Malicious Whore.
Oh, I have seen that one. That's a nun one. I've seen that one.
And it's great.
Yes, if you've watched those, you're prepped for this.
Yeah. Nice. So there's kind of a bit of mystery about Bianchi, actually. I mean, he was still alive until fairly recently, and we often tried to get him because I've been involved in disc releases of Malabimba and Strip Nude for Your Killer, and we've tried to get him in the past, and we got him on the phone, and apparently he lived his last years in Nice, and somehow was involved in the local community government, which I found pretty amusing. And he was very amused and pleased that his films were being remastered and introduced to new audiences, but he didn't particularly want to be associated with him towards the end.
Oh, that is a shame.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
I have my J&B.
Oh, you guys both have J&B.
Nice.
And a Peter Bark shot glass. So,
oh wow! And show them your shirt. You have to get up with your.
Well, yeah, you can get these at the Severin store, but this is very relevant to the movie. Peter Bark is kind of what makes this unique among Italian zombie movies.
But we'll say nothing more about him yet.
Don't need to say much more than that, but you'll know what we're talking about when you're in this movie.
Yeah, the history of him is really fascinating, so we'll dig into that afterwards. I also have a lot of questions about this writer, just because, and this is not unusual for this type of movie. I say this as somebody who just finished like 5 Lifetime films, is the writer on this did like 10 exploitation films a year from 1970 to 1985. And I am so intrigued by this person's career now. And they wrote some of the other notable, like they wrote the sequel to Patrick. They wrote Navajo
Patrick Still
Joe.
Lives.
Patrick Still Lives, yeah. And
so his name is Piero Rignoli, it seems.
Yeah, like I want to talk to this person about how they did 10 scripts a year. And I mean, after you see Burial Ground, it might make more sense. But
well, and Patrick Still Lives, which has just been released in a phenomenal special edition. But the thing,
which company put it out?
Don't know. But
okay, good.
But the thing is, Gabriele Crisanti is the kind of gel that kept all this together. He was the producer of Burial Ground, Giallo in Venice, Malabimba. And several of these, and Patrick Still Lives, and several of these kind of more sleazy entries into Italian genre cinema. And his wife was Mariangela Giordano, and she is the Mama in this movie. And
again, she's Mama. Yeah. Okay.
So the things that happen to her in his movies are very interesting, particularly Patrick Still Lives. It is quite shocking. She's probably the most put upon actress in the whole of Italian horror, and that is saying something.
Yeah, especially with Argento's family going. I want to, the main thing I feel like we can do for people, because we obviously don't want to spoil the film, is, and you know, it's something I'm always fascinated by, each cinema that has an exploitation period, whether it's Australia and tax shelters or Canada and tax shelters, has some reason for a boom. And in Italy, we're talking about Italian exploitation, which is kind of also known as rip-off cinema, mockbusters, sequels that don't exist. So what is happening in that country at that time to allow for basically it to be the Wild West of copyright infringement, or soft?
Well, they didn't seem to recognize copyright at all in terms of doing sequels. They would actually call the films, Alien 2 or something like that. So it obviously didn't matter. Or Terminator 2, for example. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 had nothing to do with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was just a retitling in Italy. So they didn't seem too bothered. When a film was a big hit, usually an American film was a big hit in Italy, or they made a follow-up to it. And in this case, Fulci had made Zombie 2. Dawn of the Dead was called Zombie. And Zombie 2, which is known as Zombie here, was made by Fulci and was a huge international success, not just domestic success. And so several rip-offs of Zombie 2 then started happening. like Dr. Butcher MD, Zombie Creeping Flesh, what's it called in the US? Hell of the Living Dead. And this film, Burial Ground. But what's interesting about the Italian zombie is that they look really kind of decaying, old, wormy, sometimes concrete looking things, like they've been in the ground such that they've just solidified. And the special effects artist on this film, Rosario Prespatino, he was one of Gennaro de Rossi's crew on Zombie. So he basically carried over that look of the zombies onto this film. He also worked on City of the Living Dead and Dr. Butcher MD. And these zombies, as much as we love Romero and Tom Savini, this is after Zombie, the look of zombies really came into its own with the rotting flesh, hard cement looking zombies. They look awesome.
It's funny that this one is because of the title seen as Zombie 2 or 3, however you want to see it. When really it seems in tone when you get to, when you get to the end, a really close to me companion to City of the Living Dead. There's a lot about the kind of sacrilegious nature of this film and just the bleak kind of outlook and apocalyptic nature.
Well, they also had an excellent mood, these films did. It was like they often were able to use, in this case, to use an old villa in just outside of Rome, which is incredible production design for a movie of this kind. But it's the villa as it stood, and a lot of these places were kind of falling into disrepair. So they allowed film crews to come in and for a couple of weeks and shoot and get blood all over the place and get up to all kinds of antics, as you'll see.
For any Warhol fans, this is the same villa as Blood for Dracula, correct?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And Patrick still lives, and Nosferatu in Venice, and Nightmare Castle, and Bay
Oh,
of
wow.
Blood, and
So all 7 releases basically.
Absolutely. Well, that's why we went there, and we've got a whole tour of the villa on the Blu-ray of this.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Somehow in this film, it also makes it feel, well, and I mean, it was intended. These are also known as the Italian Gothic horrors because most of them do have this kind of crumbling villa. So it feels like a Victorian Gothic with all of this crazy exploitive sleaze and then also the zombies. So it's an amalgamation of a lot. But we already got a question that's a really good one. Michael Galen's asking, I noticed that the poster for Burial Ground had no one under 17 admitted. Was Burial Ground ever actually submitted to the MPAA? I'll let you answer that question a bit, David, but I know that when Burial Ground was released to VHS by Vestron in the 1980s, it did have cuts. The very first release here in the US was pretty chopped up. And it wasn't until I'd say the early 2000s when I recall it like the uncut version of Burial Ground getting the release here. So was it ever submitted?
I don't know whether it was ever submitted, but I do know that Dawn of the Dead kind of opened up this possibility of releasing a horror movie without a rating. So because Dawn of the Dead was going to get an X rating and they didn't want to be associated with a porno, basically. So they decided to go out without a rating, but with this warning saying no one under 17 admitted. And so I would think that films like this and Zombie essentially just decided to follow suit. Maniac, Nightmare and the Damaged Brain, stuff like that. They went out and it was almost like a badge of honor. You're going to see some gory stuff in this movie. And sure enough, they all deliver.
Well, that sounds like a hell of a way to jump into it right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted to mention
Cheers.
Cheers.
Excellent. We do something a little unusual. When we get to a portion where we want to involve the audience, we can actually bring them in as panelists momentarily and hope that everyone is camera ready. After a few months of this, hopefully everyone that tunes in is used to it, but we'll talk about the film after. And if you guys have questions and you want to jump in, we can do that too. So I'm going to run the whole film now through the webinar. So just sit back and enjoy what will be one of the most exciting and unusual, and certainly the sleaziest movie you'll see all year. So
thank you guys for putting this film on. It's a real classic and should be seen in colleges across the world.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of which, as I've said so many times now, the first film back, The Devil's Honey. When-
Well, we had it all
in
teed up.
IMAX.
It was
I know,
all
the
ready to
DCP
go,
was
man.
made and everything.
So good.
Yeah.
I
were
took
showing-
saxophone lessons. I was ready to do this
We
live.
were showing it in the IMAX theater, you guys. How fucking bonkers is that? Oh my
How
gosh.
dare you, coronavirus?
The
We'll get-
universe interfered. Unbelievable.
Well, that's why the vaccines were so fast.
Yeah.
To
They
get
were-
Devil's
they're
Honey
motivated. Pfizer's motivated.
in IMAX. So yeah.
I hope so.
All right, everyone, enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Cheers, David.
Welcome back. We kept almost everyone.
Oh my gosh. I was expecting, it looked like we only lost 3 people. I was expecting more. I'm proud.
I'm surprised we didn't gain more during just before the breast biting scene. I think just some random people like you get at a movie theater on Grindhouse who walk in just for that scene.
You cannot unsee any of that. So
That's
you're
right.
welcome.
Trigger warning after the movie. Don't forget
That
that.
actor would have made a great Toby in Sweeney Todd. You know,
Really?
maybe he's 5, maybe he's 50. There's like some man-child thing going on there.
So even though that I do have to say with Italian cinema, they were usually kind of flexible with like the adult child casting. Like you still see children in these movies that kind of makes you cringe and go, oh my God, that kid's like, 10. And in this movie, with this one, they were aware that they needed to cast an adult. And so Michael is actually 25. Which somehow makes it
To get around the law. Anytime you're casting just to get around the law, you're doing something right, I guess, in this cinema.
Yeah. So Michael is actually much older, but in that he kind of became a cult icon, where after people started rediscovering this movie, they really kind of went on a quest to find out what ever happened to him. And he has his own Twitter feed now and has his own t-shirts, and you can order them through Severin. So some fascinating stuff, even just with that actor.
And apparently people think he looks like Dario Argento, which I didn't pick at all, but online, even in the write-ups, they're like, oh, he was famous for looking like Dario Argento and I'm just like, okay, that wasn't how I was seeing it. But I do think, everyone gives him a hard time. We have to kind of see it from his perspective as a character. I mean, no.
Yeah, that's sad. This
No,
is
he's a complete perv. Sorry. He's just a complete perv. It's totally creepy. The incest vibes in this are out of control. And
Oh
what you
my
walk
God.
away with, I mean, it's like you were bringing up the screenwriter at the top of this movie, which I found, mildly amusing only because this film, I think, has the least exposition of almost any movie I've ever seen,
There's
let alone
none.
even a zombie film. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, you don't even really, I had to see it a second time this week just to know why they were there. I didn't even know why the people were in the house.
It doesn't really
first
matter, does it? No, it's like seriously, like, did anyone drop plot here?
No, I mean, yeah, it's very
Um,
unusual. Like it's very structurally, even in Fulci's stuff, he will have a lot of detective type of wrappings just to kind of keep a story thread going. And in this one, it's really like, no, a bunch of people show up to the house because I guess the professor's going to reveal something to them. He never makes it because he's killed. And then what they have sex once, go to breakfast, and then it's all
It's
off.
done. I mean, there's some makeout
Yeah.
scenes by a fountain. There's like some dry humping by a gate, and then it's done. And
Which is
the
pretty
zombies
wild.
are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
So
if
this
there's like usually some bit of like prophecy or something. Like the professor's work is like, this is the standard. Like if my theories are correct,
yeah.
and you launch into it, but then you never actually know.
There's no Necronomicon. There's no thing. I mean, you see some symbols, but they just, they really dive into it. And then it's pretty grim and unrelenting when you think about the story that then takes place. They're just, especially that, I think that the woman who is their maid or, whatever she is, that death scene is really something. Like there's a scene, watching it a second time today, I noticed when he throws her body out, just close up of the hand turning. It's those kind of details that make these movies, I think, more memorable than just the zombie onslaught, because a lot of this exploitation was often in the hands of people who were actually quite good filmmakers.
Yeah.
Quite talented filmmakers were making material that they probably wouldn't have made if it wasn't in vogue. And so then therefore it's suddenly elevated in this kind of crazy way. So little shots like that you'll be like, oh, that's a detail that if somebody was just a hack, I don't think they would have caught, you know?
There still is a lot of what we consider to kind of be staples of Italian cinema of this time: the press-ins on the eyes, the quick zooms in and out, the teeth, the slightly canted angles. Like, there's still a lot that we look at and say, that's standard Italian art cinema of this time, but we're seeing it in this little sleazy film.
Yeah, my first note while I'm watching is like, oh, there's just so many aesthetic possibilities. You can have a crash zoom or a slow zoom. That's it. Italian cinema. And I mean, this has a lot of crash zooms in to enter Michael as a character is pretty amazing.
I love somebody posted in the chat, which one has a more gratuitous use of Michael, this or Lost Boys? Michael.
That's a good tie.
Yeah, no, I think I'd say they're par for the course on that one. But as far as ripoffs go, this one is actually pretty good as far as some of the ripoff cinema. And I know you're a big fan of the ripoff cinema, Elric.
Well, I mean, it's like I really truly believe that all cinema is ripoff cinema, and I think it all leads to the next thing. It's all about now varying degrees of talent and what's in vogue can articulate. But like I know Jim Jarmusch has that quote that he's ripping off Godard, where he says it's not where you take it from, it's where you take it to. And I think a lot of these filmmakers, sometimes it's just blatant, and they don't offer anything new. But as long as you're giving something different. And what a lot of the Italian ones were doing, they were taking things that were being done in America, often probably what they'd heard of, maybe not even seen the results of yet, heard about the box office. They then rip it off, but they add more gore or nudity or violence. For a lot of us, that's already more interesting, you know, and for the market, which obviously is drive-in, I'm going to assume was one of the biggest markets at this point. These movies probably would have done better. I don't know. When David wasn't here at the back, I was curious if, like, I understand that in Italy, it's the Wild West for copyright. But what about when those films then came to America?
That's when they would get retitled.
Yeah.
And I know some of them, like when we're talking about Cruel Jaws next in 2 weeks, we'll of course bring up that some of them were not even able to be released over here because they did sit so close to the original. They did get banned from being released in the States.
Plus, I guess it costs a lot of money to sue, right? Like, so Universal could do it with Jaws.
And they did. Universal did. And I think that Exorcist sued the
Abby.
Turkish Exorcist. They sued Abby. Okay.
Abby by William Girdler, and this is American, but that made like $8 million in like a week or something. And it was probably made in the thousands because it was called Black Exorcist. And then they sued him and he couldn't show it ever again. And that's why it's still today.
It's still hard to find. It's still super hard to find.
Can I ask you both on the topic of ripoff cinema? I know a lot of earlier Italian genre cinema was actually aimed at the Italian market to be, sort of trying to fool people into thinking it was an American film. By the time you get to this stuff, though, are they thinking about whether or not this is going to be seen in the US?
No, it's being made for an American market. Yes, it is entirely being made for an American market by this point. It was still doing something in Italy, but especially by the time you get into the 1980s, it was really pushing towards the American grindhouse market. Like once we get Bill Lustig and filmmakers like that coming into the picture in the early 1980s, that's when we really see the kind of grindhouse sleaze take off. And that's where, the markets shift back towards that, especially when we get into the mid 80s, like 82, 83, once VHS becomes a really, really prominent market. That's where everything starts getting pushed because it's a whole new way. Once VHS gets brought into the picture, previously, if you wanted to see something like Burial Ground, you would have to go to some like sleazy, seedy theater, probably at the edge of town, and sit in the audience with a bunch of other people who were willing to kind of go to the sleazy theater to see something like this. And so it didn't get quite as much reception, but when it hit VHS, suddenly it was available in mom and pop video stores all across the US and every small town in America. And so it was this mass audience, this whole new form of distro opened up. And that's where we really see a mass influx right then.
It's endlessly disappointing to me when we talk about Italian cinema. And I think it's to do with it. I think because they were no longer Italian, it was no longer part of Italian culture to go see these movies. I'm guessing at a certain point, and I don't know when that transition is, it dies. And think about stop for a moment and go, what's the last Italian horror film you saw?
It has to have been the 80s when TV penetration covered the whole country.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Demons is probably the last big one I can think of, like Demons 1 and 2.
Stage fright.
Yeah, but Demons 1 and 2 in terms of popular cinema, I'm like, after that period, I don't know if there is much. You have some name directors still making.
You don't think like some of the Soavi stuff from a little bit
no,
later?
No, I think it's all connected, but but what we're not seeing anymore after that is a trend. The trend is
That's
over.
true.
And there's no wave of these movies being made. And to think that there was a period where spaghetti westerns, these kind of horror films and Polisitachi films are all being made.
But they're cyclical in the sense that one does lead to the next once they play out. So like
but then they all ended around the same time.
Leads to the spaghetti western, which then eventually becomes more of a realist trend in Polizieski, and then you get into giallos, horror films, and then from what I can tell by these directors' careers, you get these like post-apocalyptic films.
Like
a whole slew of them.
Yeah, a lot of these did kind of post-Warriors. That is where a lot of them headed. And so you're getting things like Bronx Warriors and Tenement and things like, actually, I think Tenement was US, but it's still in that same kind of.
Yeah, the Barbarians,
Warriors,
Ruggiero Deodato did Barbarians, Fulci did Conquest. And again, unfortunately, then at that point, they are just journeymen trying to quickly pick up the remnants of a trend, as opposed to, I think the horror is a little more organic, and giallo beautifully is almost completely original. It's coming from the Edgar Wallace German strand stuff, but it's still, they made it their own. And hopefully at some point we could do some giallo, which is obviously, to me, definitively, Italian in many ways.
So I do have to say, if any of you all are really fascinated by what I will call, it's Euro sleaze. This is what is typically known as Euro trash, which was this kind of grouping of Spanish, Italian, and French cinema that we saw in the 1970s and 80s that was just really sleazy as all get out, but had these really strong artistic veins. There's a really good book from McFarlane Press that I will recommend called Perverse Titillation. It's a phenomenal read. It's dense, but it covers just every single one. And it covers Spain, France, and Italy, 1970s through mid 80s, specifically looking at any of the movies that you would never want to watch with your parents.
And because you have Fellini posters in the back of you, Alex, let's go highbrow for a moment. Which is watching this the second time this week, which I don't often do with movies like this back to back. Some things did become clear. Like, look, this movie is kind of a little bit of pure cinema-ish in the terms of just it's pure aesthetic. Like you're just watching stuff happen. It's not about exposition. And I started going, who I think would love this movie if he was around? I think he died before this. I think Louis Buñuel would have loved this movie because basically it's discreet charm of the bourgeois, and instead of all the stuff that happens in the midpoint, it's just zombies attack. There's no sense to it. It's an attack on the upper class. It's definitely a 1% horror, something we about last year on your show, which is that the upper class, the richest 1%, are being basically taken down. And I don't know the politics of this exact moment, but it could have been very much about that. And there's religious blasphemy with the monks, which is very much a Buñuel trend. So there's a lot in here that I would love to know if that's direct, and a lot of the taboos of incest and sanctity of motherhood stuff. So I'm just sitting there going, I think he would have just had a total cackle at this thing, So I think these movies can have themes. I don't think they are as disposable as a lot of people want to think of horror. I think the shelf life is because it's operating subconsciously a lot more than your average movie.
There was a comment here, and I was thinking it myself about the Capuchin crypts. Have you been to any of those in Rome? This question is referencing the one in Palermo, but I know the one in Rome where it's the Capuchin crypts use the whole
shrouds.
They put them in the monk outfit, and then they create art out of them. They're super creepy.
Yeah, it's definitely creepy. And that's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I do know that if we just look at the way that zombies kind of evolved, when we look back at Romero, the zombies honestly do not look that vastly different from normal people. They're just a little bit paler. We definitely aren't getting that much decay yet. By the time we progress to the of the dead, we move from Night of the Living Dead into Dawn and Day. They get green, they get pale. There's a
Where you
lot
get the
more
weird
shadows.
blue, yeah, and dawn.
Yeah,
the weird
it's
blue
like
color.
a gauntness to them. But that kind of meaty look, that is really Italian. And we really first start seeing that with Fulci and Zombie. And so after, or Zombie 2, or whatever, it's got like 6 other titles as well. But after we see that, a lot of the other Italians films follow suit. I will say that in this one, they look a little bit more concrete. And it's not even just in Italy that we see that kind of come about. We see it even over in like Brazil when we see like Tombs of the Blind Dead. They follow more with like a Fulci style of zombie, or I'm sorry, that one's Spanish. But it's more of a Fulci style of zombie. So it's something that we definitely see kind of apart from the US zombies, where things get really meaty, really chunky. And this one, they look more dirt caked than they do in a lot of the other Fulci films.
So can I ask you both, as filmmakers, did they run out of latex when they got to the monks? Because the prosthetics are so good. And then you get to that last scene and it looks like they just put a little bit of like white powder on their face and
smacking some shit on them. That's a great
they were recent kills. You've got to remember, they were recent kills. I got the feeling the monks had just been killed, but then one of them is like, looks like an ancient zombie. So you're like, you know, it's not, there's a lot of holes in the narrative. Don't look that closely. These movies were not meant for HD. Not original.
Certainly not the slow motion shot of styrofoam.
Like, I know.
Falling off the balcony.
But yeah, they do get a lot right. There's other moments. I mean, the difference in the zombies too is that it's this kind of horror where it's going to come very slowly, glacially towards you, but it's gonna get you. Like, you are all going to die, and that's why when Zombie first put that tagline, "We are going to eat you," like, it's just such a statement compared to, I think, where Romero was still connecting to the human. He was always making commentaries on human beings who were still alive, right? It was always a satire of what's actually going on politically. I don't think these films are. I think these are about something more ancient and a little bit more like your time's up.
Definitely. And
it tends to be more nihilistic.
And all the Italian ones insert a religious overtone. And I mean, most of that is because the Vatican is like their next door neighbor. And that's why we also see a lot of the nun films coming out of there. I mean, the same director did Malabimba, the Horror, which is a nun film, nunsploitation. But we don't necessarily see the strong infusion of Catholic faith, of going to the monastery, of the crosses being prominently displayed in the background like we do in a lot of these Italian ones. So much so that most of them use some type of like biblical prophetic quote of like, they will make your monasteries their tombs and your cemeteries their whatever, their malls. But you get these kind of, big biblical moments with these movies.
Yes, I think I instantly wrote down, when there's no more Fulci films left in Italy, this film happens. But I did note, like, between this one, the ending of this one, the ending of City of the Living Dead, and the ending of The Beyond all have a lot of similarities about the end of being, I mean, The Beyond is such a much better ending than all of them, but they are all about, there's no hope, there's no God in any of these 3 films in a way. And it's pretty bleak.
Yeah, I mean, The Beyond, you're literally just walking off into nothingness. Like, you're walking, it has an ending. The Beyond has more of an ending than any of these, but it has an ending in that there is no ending. It's this postmodern nothingness of bleak. But I will
say, more poetic. Fulci's a bit of a poet, even though he's a Schlockmeister poet, but yeah.
I will say what I noticed in this one that made me remember scenes from The Beyond is by this time in American zombie cinema, by the time we get to the 1980s, we had already established the way to kill a zombie. And so it's very much like shoot it in the head becomes something as soon as the zombie enters the frame. They figure out to shoot it in the head. In both Beyond and this movie, there's like an hour-long learning curve before they realize the head. It's like the kneecap, no, the shoulder. And then eventually somebody will try the head and it works a little bit. And then they kind of go with that course. But
in other words, they've never seen Romero movies. Like, they're not postmodern, which is good, because then you're using a whole different sense when you're into the postmodern zombie film. But it is interesting, like the word zombie doesn't even exist in any of these movies for the most part, which I always think is kind of interesting. Hard to do now, with such a long history of, and Walking Dead, something that's made it so popular. It's interesting.
We got a really good question about soundtracks here. Were they all trying to imitate Goblin, or was this part of a broader musical trend in Italy? And they're also citing similar strains in Conquest, which I will say, Elric just gave me the vinyl for Conquest for my birthday last month.
Which actually is the guy from Goblin. He's the lead in that one, yeah.
But I don't know the soundtrack history as much. Do you, Elric?
I don't know intricately, but I do know the electronic music in general was becoming more popular. But I think Goblin just burst onto the scene in such an incredible way that, of course, just like all the rip-off stuff, they are ripping off. But there's other great people, like the Shock soundtrack is incredible. So I don't know if that's Umberto or something like that. And this one I did note when I was watching it a couple days ago was it's almost science fiction like.
Yeah,
it feels like it belongs to a different genre, which it definitely gives it a whole nother kind of feeling, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent.
Is there something a little bit more evolved about these zombies? Because I feel like there's a certain understanding of how to use things that you don't often see.
Power tools. No, I noticed that at the beginning of it, it's just kind of lurching forward as people make out by fountains. And then by the end, it's like breaking open gates and using power tools and such. And they also seem to lose the ambition to just eat people. And it becomes much more kind of annihilation towards the end.
Yeah, it's clear in the Italian version because it's actually, well, technically it's connected to Jordan Peele's Us. They're just training underground for all these years, and then they emerge and they fuck our shit up, hands across zombies or something. But I do think that's one of the weirdest things about this particular one is that they seem fully evolved to use pitchforks, and the scene where they use a sheath, or however you say it, that word.
Oh my God.
It's, you know, it's really interesting because it's slow and methodical to remove her head. It's not quick and ugly. And so I think that I do have burning questions. Let me bring up some burning questions. Why is there a bear trap on the lawn of an estate?
Right? You just put that on the front lawn in the grass.
Like, I think because we've already talked about the script and we have to assume it's like 7 pages or something, right? It's got to be pretty minimal. And so if that's one of your actual script notes is that you need a bear trap on the property, why does Italian paint work like gasoline? And why does that strange child know that? He was like, Mama, light the paint. And they suddenly are lighting them on fire. I thought that was weird.
I just saw that same thing happen in a movie you guys recommended, The Initiation.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one.
So maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I mean, I'm sure paint has a flammable quality. But
I think they probably tried to make it less flammable over the years, like couches and curtains. Maybe they just don't go up in flames quite as much as they did back then. As we remove the lead, we also remove the whatever it is that is combustible. I'm speculating. I know nothing about paint composition here, but let's go with it, guys.
We didn't get our degree in that. And also, why did the dad have a gun in his belt? Why was he practicing shooting it? That was
in the art studio.
Yeah, there's just a lot of those. And again, I think it's when you have a lack of clear story, it's a lot easier to pick up every little odd choice. You know, it's hard not to see it. But again, a lot of these films, especially Fulci, become more dreamy in the way you take them in. I think his films operate into different. This film's, I feel, a bit more A to B. Like, it's got some great shocking moments, some great kills, but it doesn't have the dreaminess that maybe sticks with you like Fulci does, because I think he's just throwing a lot of different influences in there.
Yeah, Fulci, it's definitely, everything functions like a fever dream. Like, it's surreal, and at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's functioning on the same wavelength of reality. There's just a lot more going on. And that's even in Fulci's later stuff. Like, it's even when he tries to make, Murder Rock, which is like the slasher and Flashdance studio. It still has like a fever dream aspect to it. But we have a phenomenal question from Scott Cleveland, who is, if this was to be a double, oh yeah.
Do you want to tempt fate and invite some people over?
Invite some. Okay, Scott Cleveland. I don't know how to do this.
Oh, no, I got it.
Okay, Scott Cleveland.
So we're gonna move you guys over. You can ask your questions because the audience won't have seen the questions yet, and it's sort of fun.
Oh yeah, let's try this.
I'll just put a running order and I'll bring you guys over.
And I see one of my students, Jonathan, in here as well. I'm expecting a question. And Gabriel, you're in here as well. So please ask questions. Some of my prior horror students. Hey, Scott.
Hey, how we doing?
How's it going?
You caught me off guard there. I had to put on some clothes, but thanks for bringing me on.
Oh my gosh,
yeah. Behind me, just representing some
Hell
Severn
yeah.
there.
Where are you
Sure.
at in the world?
I'm in Connecticut, but you hear this Rhode Island accent of original.
What is that Manchester or is that Scotland? I can't tell the difference.
Scotland.
Okay.
Okay.
From Scotland.
What part of Scotland?
Smack bang in the middle, my friend.
Okay.
Right between Glasgow and Edinburgh.
All right, I'm from New Zealand, so we're all from Scotland, basically.
Yeah.
Originally,
You're
yeah.
okay. And
Yeah.
I know that you'll probably get pissed off when people ask, are you Australian?
All the time.
Yeah.
I hate it. Yeah.
When my very southern Appalachian mom first met Elric, she was like, that nice British boy you co-host the podcast with. And I thought his jaw dropped.
She's lucky she makes good pie.
A lot of people ask if I'm Irish, and I say, as long as you don't compare me to the English. I hope David Gregory
exactly.
still isn't on. He's one of
Exactly.
the good ones.
So yeah, you asked a phenomenal question in chat, so fire away.
Yeah, you folks got me going with these double and triple builds with Soul Survivor, Messiah of Evil, and It Follows. So
That's
what
my
about
favorite.
this one? What double or triple builds could you combine with this?
I would definitely watch House by the Cemetery.
Nice.
I feel like that would be basically like any of Fulci's zombie films are gonna definitely, I mean, like we mentioned the Beyond. I feel like the Beyond is kind of canon. So that's like a starting point. And of course, zombie. But Elric's gonna hit us with some deep cuts now. I can feel it coming.
I don't think this is live, but we're gonna put this in our next episode for you. We'll like do a special shout out because I need some time to think about if I'm gonna pair. Programming can't be done on the fly.
So see, I
take it
program
too
on the
seriously.
fly. For Elric,
That's not programming. Fulci's default. That's not programming.
oh, Elric, see, this becomes like an art form for him. We have this argument all the time where anybody's like, what's a good one to watch with this? I'm like, oh, you want this movie.
I spend
And
weeks
for him,
agonizing over this shit.
this is like preparing for him.
But
So,
also,
yeah.
I mean, partly because I hate watching something like as good as Beyond and City of Living Dead are, watching them back to back, they're all going to feel the same. So like, I'm always thinking, oh, like that's what I liked about It Follows, Messiah of Evil, and Soul Survivor. They all are different, but their dread is a similar feeling carrying over between those three films.
So if you wanted to do the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, exactly. I think I would. I mean, I'm not kidding. I think this would be, look, another movie I was thinking about, funnily enough, another movie I thought about. I think this could be the case. Imagine that the screenwriter, who's obviously a real screenwriter, imagine if he wrote a real script. Imagine, in fact, he was writing The Cook, the Thief, and the Wife and the Lover. And then the producer saw a zombie, and the producer said, no, fuck it, zombies. And so he literally had the starting of what would have been The Cook, and then it became this film. It's possible. So that's my three. Discreet charm, Cook, the Thief, the Wife, and the Lover, and then we end with Burial Ground.
Oh shit,
That's a pretty fucking crazy
bonkers night. But somehow it all comes back to eating people and weird child scenes.
All
so
I know
there
is
you go.
Cock will be eaten. That's all I know. Actually, that's a good connection. One has a body part of the man. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, body parts are eaten.
The tagline, if it was like a grindhouse triple bill or double bill, cock will be eaten.
Cock will be eaten. I don't think USC will sponsor that.
I still have to work here next semester, y'all.
Yeah. But even as crazy as that sounds, the movie we just watched is crazier. I mean, a mother does open herself up to be eaten from her son.
I don't know, Elric. We could go weird exploitation-y, kind of incesty movies. I feel like we did a lot of these recently on our Patreon show.
Yeah, if you wanted a good incest movie. always wanted to see that. Actually, no, I think it's Scottish. The Tim Roth's The War Zone. You ever see that one?
Oh.
Tim Roth only directed one movie, and it was, I think, after Gary Oldman directed his first movie, which was also Scottish. I think it's Scottish in the end. It's really intense, but Tim Roth's one it's a really bleak. It almost operates like a horror movie, but it's about a family.
It does.
And there's a really intense incest story with Ray Winston in it that. Those movies disturb me much more than any zombie movie can ever disturb me, you know? So let's add that to the 4.
Warzone is the most intense of all of them. That's a heavy cut.
Warzone's really heavy.
Isn't there like a Pasolini Oedipus film?
There is Oedipus Rex. He made Oedipus Rex. I don't remember that, but his are often like in the period and he'll have costumes, and that to me is a little less shocking than when you make it modern, you know? Like he did with Sailor or something. Sailor's more mixed up.
So So we just gave you the absolute craziest, like quadruple quintuplet bill ever.
After
Ever.
I said I wouldn't.
I think I'll need to watch like Home Alone or something. The
Yeah.
next day for
Good
him.
call. It's a
No,
good
watch
call.
watch
Go
Deadly Games. Watch that Deadly Games, that French Home Alone Santa ripoff. That thing was amazing.
It's
I
great.
put the Vinegar Syndrome subscription, so I need to check.
Dude,
that.
I only watched it for the first time last week and it blew me away.
It's
really-
wild. It's wild. I'll be
it's just
talking
pure
about it
fun.
on next week's episode. It's
Oh,
totally
good. Oh, you
wild.
saw it. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It's really fun.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Scott.
Hey, folks, this was great. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good to meet you, mate.
We've got one from Gabriel Neeb, who is one of my former horror students.
Excellent. Bringing him over now.
And I don't know the answer, but it's a good question.
And
And plus, I want to say hi to Gabriel. Hey, Gabriel, how is it going?
just make sure to unmute yourself.
You're muted, Gabe.
Oh, hello. Yeah, it's going about as well as it can go.
Is that a unicorn behind you?
Yes.
That's because he gave me a unicorn during a surgery thing, and that's why I have this ridiculous thing. So hi, Becca. It's nice to see you.
Hey, oh my gosh, it's good to see both of you. Okay, so reactions for the film. What did you guys think?
Okay, let me get better. I'm
Subtle.
just taking it. I'm just gonna take better lighting. We're fine. We're in our apartment. Sorry, I just got home from work and everything. Why is there?
This
okay.
is like Cannibal
Better?
Holocaust now.
I know,
Like all
seriously.
found footage
As I
and
take over
enhance.
husband. So this is the first time I've seen this. I have questions like, is that actually the dad? Because he never said daddy. And it's
No,
like, he
No,
always says
no,
mama.
she married him recently, so I think it's operating on the he killed his father Oedipus style, and now he wants to fuck his mom, and then this dude moves in, and that's where we're at.
That's where.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Gabe, you answer. I'm all for here.
Okay. Well, there's no way to follow up on that question because it's far more interesting than mine. Anyways, one, I haven't seen a lot of zombie movies that have Etruscan zombies.
Yeah.
Right?
Horror for the two history nerds out there. Yay for that. But yeah, my main question was, is director Andrea Bianchi related in any way to Italian artist Simone Bianchi?
I have no idea on that one.
I was afraid of that.
I know definitively. The answer is no, because I just
Okay.
Googled it for you.
Thank you.
I figured if I looked it up and it said yes, then we could go somewhere, but no, it didn't look like it. But worth
Okay.
the try.
Yeah, well, Simone Bianchi's pretty good. So I like hunt down some of his comics. He did 2 X-Men issues. He did a series called Shining Night. So he's worked with Grant Morrison.
Yep, I
Oh,
love Grant Morrison.
excellent.
So I hope some of you actually recognize that name.
Yes, I do.
So okay.
Definitely.
Good to see all of you again.
It's good seeing you both. You guys have a very happy holiday. And thank you for the card.
Oh, you're welcome. And by the way, book recommendation, because this reminded me a lot of it. I forgot her first name, but the author is, the book is called Mexican Gothic, which has kind of, I don't want to say zombie-ish, but it has the family incest mentality. And it's like 1920s Mexico with a slightly Lovecraftian horror tone. And that came out earlier this year. And that's reminded me a lot of with this movie.
Oh, I am so in. Okay. Definitely.
And that's a good, I'm glad you even used the word Lovecraftian, because I do think that is more in all of this Italian zombie work than it ever was. It's not part of the American zombie work at all, but there's something about the shadow of Lovecraft, obviously in like House by the Cemetery and stuff, but I think that's relevant for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then especially kind of with the housing stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much.
Good to see
Okay.
you.
Good seeing you both. So Judy is a librarian and she gives me the best book recommendations ever. So yeah, let's see here. We have some really good questions rolling in.
You pick them and I'll move them over.
Yeah, I can't
how
answer the
about-
quote one but there is a misspelling in that final quote. Did you guys pick that one?
I didn't.
I think they misspell the final quote.
So let's go with Scott Davidson, because this is one that I'm curious about myself. And
All right.
I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on this.
Oops, sorry. Moving you over now, Scott. All right, so Scott, you're on our side of things. If you don't want to turn on your camera, just make sure to unmute yourself, and we can at least hear you.
Scott, are you still with us?
Let's get a backup person over.
Sure, totally. Let's go ahead and bring over Damon Brazel.
Well, Jules we can answer off without even bringing Jules Minton on, because we both love Cemetery Man.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Cemetery Man.
It's one of our favorites too, I think,
By
mutually.
far.
Like we talked about in our first episode. Yeah, first episode of the new show, Colors of the Dark, because our guest is Ryan Spindell was also heavily influenced by that film. And that film does it in a whole different way.
I read Dylan Dog growing up, and supposedly the author of Dylan Dog had designed Dylan Dog after Rupert Everett.
Mm-hmm.
So
oh my gosh.
The film was really perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen a more edgy Dylan Dog when they finally got to it. That would have been fun, but could still happen.
Yeah. Hey, Damon. Oh, good shirt.
Yeah, just got it today. Death Records.
Oh, hell
this
yeah. That
dude
is
we know.
beautiful. Yeah, it is good to see you.
Good to actually be speaking with you guys. I want to say, first of all, thank you all for doing this. I mean, I live in the middle of Western Kentucky, and I don't get to do stuff like this. And amazingly, the pandemic's opened a lot of stuff for me. So I really hope stuff like this continues after the pandemic. I mean, because
for sure,
I'm kind of more introverted as time goes on anyway. So
I agree. I think the world's going to change. I think we're going to get back to another normal-ish, but I also think we're going to incorporate some of the stuff that is working. I agree. It opens up this world in a really cool way.
Yeah, definitely.
So
your question's great.
Yeah, basically it was, when zombie movies started, it was always a voodoo thing and they were being led by a master. And then Romero kind of, I guess, accidentally destroyed that. And what I think is so interesting about the Italian horror films is they combine them both. You have the flesh eating, you have the death by headshot, but then there's always some sort of supernatural thing. And I was wondering, why you thought that was. And I know you mentioned, the Vatican being their neighbor, so that could have something to do with it. And which do you all prefer, the supernatural zombie or the scientific zombie?
That's a great observation, Damon. So we see the voodoo zombie as prevalent for the first part of kind of our cinematic history. And actually the very first kind of zombie creation was from this book called This Magic Island, which was a ethnographic book that was written about Haiti back in the early 1900s. And in it, the zombie gets a mention. It's a paragraph, but for some reason, everybody who read the book kind of fixated on that. And they ended up turning the book, the Magic Island, into a play. It was on Broadway. And then that is kind of where we kind of see our early understandings of zombies coming from, is this whole concept of the voodoo zombie, and it coming from this kind of, I'm sorry, my dog is angry at me now. And this is the other beauty of the pandemic, is my dog wants out and she's going to yell at me about that, even though
right. Well,
I'm
they become like slave, the Haitian version is they're slaves being used for plantations, and that gets carried over for, pretty long time. I Walk with a Zombie, just the new movie, I think I talked about last week, called Zombie Child, which isn't really horror. It has elements of it, is a throwback kind of commenting on that, but that was the real idea of what a zombie is, which is a person kind of they think they've died, the world thinks they've died, but actually they've been drugged. They're a little brain damaged from being lack of oxygen, being in a grave, and then they emerge and they're being controlled by a master and to do work. And it's it doesn't seem like a very productive worker, right? When they're brain damaged. So it's a weird. The whole thing's dark and kind of disturbing. So you're right. It's a huge leap from that to where we're seeing the undead walking, which is definitely more of a biblical play.
And by the time, but it fits with the 70s, because when we look at the 1950s zombie, which is kind of where Romero was coming from with Night of the Living Dead, zombies become the product of aliens. They become the product of science. They become the product of nuclear blasts. So it's all very kind of in line with 1950 cinema. But then by the time we get to the 1970s, I mean, we're seeing religion being infused everywhere. There's a reason that we have The Omen and The Exorcist, and, you know, everybody's questioning everything, and there's this bleakness to it. And so the fact that, you know, the kind of religion gets infused with the zombies, it makes total sense with what's going on historically in cinema across the board.
Yeah.
It feels like your questions, like, even though it is science versus supernatural, I think it's also political versus supernatural in a way. You know, I think Romero's using it as this a political device versus, I don't think the Italians for the bulk are doing that, but I think it doesn't mean it's not slipping in there subconsciously all the time. You know, but I don't think that was their primary goal. I prefer the supernatural to answer.
I prefer the supernatural. Yeah. And I will say the one thing that the Italians did that I wish we still had was the demon.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Demons came out as kind of this version of zombie that were much more kind of supernatural. There was no, I mean, they never really had like a strong religious explanation to it, but we see demons happen, you know, within Bava and Argento and everything. And then we see them come over into the States a tiny, tiny bit with like Night of the Demons, and then they're gone. And right now, if you go to Hollywood and you try to pitch a demon movie, everybody's like, well, are there angels? Like, it's this very kind of, the TV show Supernatural is their understanding of how demons function now. Like, oh, there have to be angels and rules and archangels and incantations and all this stuff. So I miss just the straightforward demon.
You know what, the best that mixes all of these, just think about this movie again today, is The Sentinel. The Michael Winner New York film. There's something about that film that I feel is as close as we'll get to like an Italian Fulci movie in America as possible. You know, it's a really, that's the deep cut for those people who are listening who are into this kind of stuff. It's a really interesting movie about a woman who wants to move into this fancy brownstone. She's warned off about it. There's a priest who lives on the top floor, is blind, played by John Carradine, and you basically learn there's a portal to hell that he's guarding, and you know, she might be next in line. And when things come in and out, so there's zombies, but there also feel like there's a demon quality and there ghosts, and it just kind of mixes all these lores up in a way that I find a lot more just interesting and kind of exciting. So that'd be good.
The Sentinel.
The Sentinel, yeah, it's Michael Winner.
It's great.
It's the best.
I'll have to remember that.
The best Charles Bronson director turned film critic there's ever been. Food critic, rather. He became, his last 20 years, he became a famous British food critic, which blows my mind. He made Death Wish and everything. So that's Michael Winner.
Yeah, look, I also want to thank you guys for, I think, the past 8 years helping me find movies that, I mean, I've been listening to you guys since probably episode 30. I remember it was episode 32 of Killer POV because of Shout Factory. You all interviewed the Shout Factory people, and I listened to it, and I'm just like, okay, I've got to stick with these guys, and I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you for sticking with our blatherings for so many years.
Yeah.
Oh, it used to be, I used to have to drive like 45 minutes to and from work, so it made Friday was just a whole lot easier.
We'll keep going for as long as they'll have us. So yeah.
Oh, I hope so.
Thanks, Damon.
So
appreciate
much.
it.
You know, on that note, I really did want to ask, what is the so Colors of the Dark, obviously you can subscribe to. Tell us about the Patreon.
So Elric and I have a Patreon because a lot of the stuff that we watch is even too weird for kind of public broadcast. And we ran into the problem with our regular show, Colors of the Dark, because it is a free podcast, that when we talked about movies that were like impossible to find, that you would really have to hunt for, that people would get angry and be like, wait, this isn't on Netflix? And so we decided that we were going to kind of create a deeper, more niche show where we can talk about this one film that if you really want it, you're going to have to order a VHS and it's not going to come cheap. And, you know,
it's definitely more deep cut. It's more deep cuts. It's kind of the idea, like, I could totally just do a show of just deep cuts and I'd be satisfied. But I think we wanted to take what Becca was already doing and mix it with what some of the stuff we liked doing from Killer PV and Shockwaves. And then we actually started deep cuts before Colors of the Dark. So we were doing it as our kind of interim. And then we're like, well, we should keep, it's kind of like an overtime. So if you love that show, but you want 3 more crazy recommendations, you go over there and it seems to be pretty healthy interest in it. I bet some people even prefer it just because, everyone's different with what they want from this genre. And our interest tends to be discoveries, but we also like to kind of dig around. And
yeah, like we watch everything. We will see everything that comes out, whether it is the most mainstream horror ever made, all the way down to last week we covered Dark Age, which it's an Italian exploitation alligator movie that I think you can only find on VHS.
Yeah, I think still maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one to find, but yeah, we totally covered it.
Fangoria.
Exactly. And for a lot of these movies, that's how I first found it. And the back pages of Fangoria is now YouTube. And so that is where a lot of people will suddenly be like, oh my God, I found it here, or I found it on this weird little site, or I found this, person who was selling the Indonesian release from 10 years ago. I highly recommend purchasing a region-free player. It is a wonderful purchase if you're going to watch weird shit.
Yeah, if you're interested in the Patreon, just go www.darkweb.com and you will go through a series of tasks. And once you satisfy that with your Bitcoins, you find our Patreon. That's why our Patreon's struggling. Not a lot of people get through these tasks of hell. I actually don't even know how to find the dark web, but I am fascinated.
You just Google Rebekah, McKendry, Elric, Kane deep cuts, and we're cheap. We're like $5, and you get a whole bunch of extra titles.
The other thing is they're not always great movies. They're always worth talking about movies and interesting movies, but they're not always like the ones we love, which we would tend to make it on the main show. But that doesn't, I really believe this movie. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say this. I believe this movie we just watched is kind of as important as 8.5 or La Dolce Vita behind you in its way, in the way that those movies, are masterpieces. Doesn't mean this is a masterpiece, but it means there's still history behind it. There's all these ideas in it. There's aesthetics to it. And it's, it's kind of punk rock cinema, which is really cool,
And I'd say this is the prevailing theme of every show Elric and I have ever done together, which is that to love cinema is to love all cinema. And which is a quote from somebody who I can't remember, and I should remember their name.
Except Microwave Massacre.
That's Microwave Massacre. Somebody loves that movie.
Bastards.
But, that even if we are looking at Italian ripoff cinema with minimal plot and, questionable, logic, there is still something historically important about this movie, and there is still something that is aesthetically being done with it, and there is still something really important about why this exists and what it's doing and how it resonates within the viewer, and why I would rather watch this than most Academy Award-winning movies on most nights. Because
you can't, if cinema ever becomes myopic, and this is why we're in a very dangerous moment, you can't all be La Dolce Vita as great as it's a masterpiece. But if every movie was like that, of course it can't be. It's art. So you need this like spectrum of different feelings. And, I'm pretty concerned. I mean, I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist, but you get pretty concerned with deals. Look at Netflix original movies. A lot of them have a similar issue. Look at the running time of a lot of them, 2 hours, 20 minutes, 2 hours, 25. And you start to go, oh, I don't feel like that. And if that's all I start to get offered, at a certain point. So if everything does become if cinema moves towards only the streaming, we might start to see streaming not as an output device, but as a form, as a structure for the streaming film. And I that worries me. And it's something I have no interest in. And I really hope we can maintain all these different colors of cinema. I'm all for the streaming and Amazon movies. And I love all types of movies, but I just think we have to fight. A lot of people on this call might be filmmakers or distributors and it's up to all of us to say the cinema experience is still important when we come out of this pandemic. Going to the cinema is still an important way to experience a movie, in my opinion.
Because Anita Ekberg made La Dolce Vita, but eventually she was in The Killer Nun, which is an equally awesome movie.
This is why I do the show with you, because you know that, and she is pretty remarkable in let's be real.
Yes,
it's pretty remarkable. But I think that's an important, and that's also why we chose the title Colors of the Dark. It wasn't just because it's a great riff on the Martino movie. It's also because we wanted to touch on that show on all the colors of the dark, all the different types of things, whether they are easily categorized as horror or fringe or genre exploitation, because it's all interesting to us.
Well, we've been blathering. Alex,
more questions.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for this. This has been fantastic.
I honestly don't know why we didn't think of this sooner.
We will do this as much as you will have us. Elric, we were texting during the movie, like, this is great. Like, we do screenings all over Los Angeles usually, and and they're weird, and 50 people show up and we geek out about our weird cinema. But yeah, the fact that we can have people from Connecticut and Kentucky is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we love
And
this.
and to just to highlight what was the other Scott was asking, we're definitely going to do stuff at the cinema school that's virtual, even once we're screening things on campus again, because we have re-engaged alumni who for years have missed this sort of thing because they don't live in town or they don't want to drive to campus during rush hour. So as long as distributors are willing to be as generous as Severin and some of the other companies that I've been working with, then we'll definitely try and keep doing stuff like this in the future.
Yeah.
I do see that Scott is still with us, but I don't know if he figured out his microphone.
Scott Davidson. Oh, it's okay. Well, I will say that coming up just after Christmas, y'all, we're giving you an amazing Christmas present, and we are screening Cruel Jaws. So when we talk about rip-off cinema, Cruel Jaws is definitely up there. Right after Jaws came out in the States, this is the log line elevator pitch of Italian rip-off cinema, especially within the sharksploitation realm. Right after Jaws came out, that there was this immediate rush to what type of monsters can we put in the water. I love these movies. There's actually one right behind me, Up from the Depths. It's not good. It's an amazing poster, which is why I have it on my wall, because I love the poster. But Cruel Jaws is one of these shark ripoff films, and it is absolutely amazing, and it is fun, and there is so much to talk about and so much shark action. So
is that different from Last Shark, or is it just another?
Different.
But it's taking parts of Last Shark. Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole history there I can't even get into. That's like David Gregory's going to have to get into that one because there was legal maneuvering involved in that.
Yeah. But there is people, what are they're doing windsurfing, right?
Yes.
There's some great windsurfing action in there. So for the windsurfers of the listeners, you're in for a treat.
So anyone else you want to call on, or is that way for us to segue to the...
Well, I will say, we're getting a lot of thanks, which is phenomenal. I will say we did have one question from Alex A, who asked if the shaky camera work was stolen from the first Evil Dead. And no, it was not actually. Shaky camera work had definitely been a part of kind of the verite aesthetic, had entered horror a couple of years before this. So we were definitely seeing it before this. It is unusual in one of these films because most of the Italian films, they really went for kind of a studio look just because they had all the capabilities to. So when you watch a lot of the Fulci and the Argento and the Bavas, like they're very polished studio look. So to see it in something like this is a little bit different, but it wasn't a lot of kind of the Giallo films will use shaky cam at choice moments.
And it's also unlikely that Evil Dead would have been seen by then. It's pretty close. But yeah, in Italy itself, you have the neorealism, which is, really where we're starting to see smaller, lighter cameras running through the streets a bit more. So, but it is, you're right. There was a couple shots in there where I did think of Evil Dead in terms of just using the camera
Chasing
as the point of,
face.
point of view too. It goes up to the guy under the tree and they look up suddenly and it's not a zombie, it's a person. Little touches like that. So could have been.
Okay. Excellent. And I'm getting texts from students. Hi, Jonathan. He is talking about the Beyond, so I get to respond to that. So yay. Thank you guys so much.
And if you're excited by Italian Fulci cinema, you can go listen to our 2-hour, we're on a podcast that's not ours called Screen Drafts, where they rank movies, and we had a fun time ranking the films of Lucio Fulci. So there's a good discussion in there on Fulci.
And you can also listen to our regular shows. Fangoria's Colors of the Dark. You'll find that on the Fangoria Podcast Network. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms, Apple, Stitcher, Audio Boom, whatever your podcast catcher of choice is, Colors of the Dark. And please also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then our Patreon show is Deep Cuts. And for a whole $5, you can listen to us go even weirder.
Yeah, we're gonna go weird in a couple days.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna tease it. We're watching this. I think it's Italian film called Spider Labyrinth.
Dude, okay.
I haven't seen this yet.
Okay. All I'm gonna set it up with, and I'm not joking when I say this. This movie, if there'd never been a third part of the Mothers trilogy, and you just called this the third part, it's nowhere near as good as the other two. But there's enough touches in it and bonkersness that it kind of would work. It's enough witches and religious symbolism and just weird aesthetic that it would almost work with Suspiria and Inferno. So I'm excited I only watched it a couple days ago, so I'm excited for you to see it.
I'm gonna watch it tomorrow evening. So okay, Spider Labyrinth. That's our deep
then.
cut for next week.
Yes. Hopefully that hooks you.
We premiered hosted the LA premiere of the Mother of Tears.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I can find that Q&A, the look on my face trying to process that movie in real time and then having to interview the writers, because Argento wasn't there, but that's definitely
I think we're friends with the writers. I think we know
we
them.
are.
Okay. I think I heard that on one of your podcasts.
Of that and Giallo as well. We actually know a lot of his American but everyone knows the problem.
I hosted the screening of Dracula 3D at AFM, and I had never seen it, and I saw it with everyone else in the crowd, and then afterwards walking up and doing the Q&A for Dracula 3D at the sales market was a trip. So Mantis.
Just remember, if you're ever in that situation and you don't know what to say about a movie, somebody shows you, you just do what Clu Gulliger says, and you do. Now that's a movie. Because no one can say otherwise.
There's a lot of movie in that movie.
That's a whole lot of movie. But thanks for doing this, Alex.
My pleasure. I cannot wait to do this again for Cruel Jaws. And then you guys please put together a wish list for January.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And we got to have you on the regular show. So we got to figure out, start thinking about what is your weirdish, most niche area of horror that you can't wait to talk about. And we'll get you on Colors of the Dark.
It's a deal. Of course, we've already covered incest horror, but
That's
just the iceberg. Just the iceberg.
We've never talked about Poltergeist, Amityville 2 yet.
Oh, yes.
I feel there's a whole thing with Amityville 2.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. No, they tried to make it hot, which is just even worse. Like if you make incest hot, it's just like
Good stuff. All right, guys. Have a great night. Have a great holidays. And I'll see you in 10 days.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.